Dear friends, the first domino, named Keir Starmer, has fallen. But this was, of course, only the start of the total collapse of the transnational deep state. And this is what I want to tell you about with this statement. Today, I'll tell you about, first, the work of a Russian investment banker, a Russian citizen whose work is of enormous importance to all of us. Then I'll tell you about the work of an American citizen who is of enormous importance for all of us. And then finally, I'll tell you about the 3 lines of attack we've used to encircle the monsters and leave them no way out, tying all of this together, and how we will now, we, that is all of us, hold every single one of the monsters worldwide to account. I'll start with part 1. I'll start with the Russian investment banker Kirill Dmitriev. On June 22nd, he posted this with respect to Keir Starmer's forced removal from the chessboard. And I quote, "We did this jointly by exposing Keir Starmer's warmongering and consistently wrong policies on immigration, crime, energy, and economy. He failed to protect Britain and was destroying Western civilization." End of quote. Dmitriev's next sentence is, "Merz is next, unless he changes policies." Now, since everyone knows that Merz is neither smart enough nor strong enough to not follow the monster's orders, we can be sure that Merz is next. By the way, one day before Starmer announced that he is stepping down, President Trump posted on Truth Social that Starmer will step down. And by the way, Kirill Dmitriev is not just any Russian investment banker. He is a Harvard and Stanford educated economist, and he is President Putin's closest economic advisor. And it would surprise no one if he is also an important link between Putin and Trump. Looks to me like one should take his word seriously. Merz is next. 2. We have just posted a piece written by an American citizen by the name of Leland Lerman. It is a detailed account, a step-by-step chronological account on how the infamous eugenics and euthanasia program of the monsters evolved over the past 170-plus years to morph into the corona pandemic started by them in early 2020. The title of the article is "The Story We Were Not Supposed to Tell." It officially started, I think there's probably lots of other things that happened thousands of years ago, but it officially started in the modern day in 1859 with Charles Darwin's publication On the Origin of Species and his theory of natural selection, which Herbert Spencer then turned into the phrase survival of the fittest. Then Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, took it one crucial step further and invented the word eugenics, from the Greek word well-born, intending to improve the human race by controlling who got to have children and who didn't. In 1907, the Eugenics Education Society was founded in London with Winston Churchill as its vice president. The U.S. and British establishment attended, and the robber barons of the era funded the project. U.S. steel magnate Carnegie, U.S. railroad magnate Harriman, and U.S. oil magnate Rockefeller wrote the checks. This resulted in laws on compulsory sterilization in 35 U.S. states. And in 1927, the U.S. Supreme Court, under Oliver Wendell Holmes, upheld a compulsory sterilization law of the state of Virginia, which was, of course, based on the eugenics project. Holmes wrote, "3 generations of imbeciles is enough." This infamous decision by the name of Buck versus Bell is still on the books. Less than 20 years later, it was cited by the defense in the Nuremberg trials, arguing that what those defendants in Nuremberg had done was no different from what had been legally happening in England and the U.S. under the eugenics program, as a result of which more than 60,000 people were forced to endure sterilization. The defense of Buck versus Bell didn't really help the defendants in Nuremberg, but Buck versus Bell is still on the books and must be overturned as quickly as possible. As a result of what the Germans had been doing during the war, eugenics had gotten a bad name, of course. So without batting an eye, the people and monsters behind the eugenics movement and program simply changed its branding, calling it birth control in the 1920s or family planning in 1952. Julian Huxley, whose brother Aldous had written Brave New World, came up with the word transhumanism. But before this, in 1946, when UNESCO was founded, with Julian Huxley as its first president, he wrote that human material should be improved by UNESCO. And he continued, and I quote, "Even though it is true that any radical eugenics policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible, it will be important for UNESCO to see that the eugenics problem is examined with the greatest care." Huxley is describing the majority of the human population, which civilization is now keeping alive in increasing numbers. This burden, he states, this burden will prevent human progress. Therefore, he continues, UNESCO must prepare the public mind to accept eugenic policy. The strategy is clear. Use trusted international institution to manufacture consent for a program that currently, that is back in 1946, right after World War II, that currently cannot be named. Other such fronts for the eugenics program were the World Wildlife Fund, co-founded by Huxley in 1961 alongside Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and Godfrey Rockefeller. Keep in mind, all the while, Huxley was also president of the British Eugenics Society. In 1974, NSSM 200, that's National Security Study Memorandum 200, and Henry Kissinger named 13 nations whose population growth required reduction as a matter of U.S. national security, identifying as its primary mechanisms contraception and sterilization, targeting women of childbearing age. Another UN agency, UNFPA, was explicitly designated as its delivery vehicle, and it stated, "Throughout the implementation of the process, we have to make sure to hide our tracks and disguise our programs." Then Bill Gates, whose father was the president of another one of those eugenics fronts, Planned Parenthood, entered the arena in 1999 and announced a $2.2 billion donation to fund, I quote, "population and health activities worldwide," end of quote. He announced this at a UN event. Thousands of women died as a result of mass sterilization in India, but this is only the tip of the iceberg, as India, but also Africa, were also used as testing grounds for all kinds of new so-called medication and so-called vaccination. Huxley's blueprint was not an historical artifact, but a template based on which Peter Daszak, a British zoologist, founded another such front named Wildlife Conservation Trust in 2001 and built it into Eco Health Alliance, presented publicly as, I quote, "pandemic prevention and wildlife conservation," end of quote, funded primarily by the now dismantled, by President Trump and Elon Musk, USAID. Daszak confirmed CIA, FBI, and DIA contact under sworn congressional testimony in 2024. And Andrew Huff, EcoHealth's former associate vice president, submitted under penalty of perjury to the U.S. Senate, I quote, "EcoHealth was a CIA front organization to collect viral samples and to collect intelligence on foreign laboratory capacity." EcoHealth Alliance funded bat corona, illegal of course, bat coronavirus gain of function research that at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and then Fauci and his German counterpart Drosten, who were prominent perpetrators of these illegal experiments, lied about the origin of the virus, declaring a lab origin a conspiracy theory. In other words, the corona pandemic is based on and was funded by the lying monsters and institutions that are behind the eugenics project. Hiding behind nice-sounding names and well-respected organizations such as the aforementioned institutions or reproductive health in 1994 or women's empowerment in 1999, and finally, global health in the 2000s. As of 2022, the experimental COVID shots had killed some 20 million people and had caused serious adverse effects in 2.4 billion people worldwide. Serious means amputations, myocarditis, and other such serious adverse events. My friend Vera Shraf, Holocaust survivor and founder of the Alliance for Human Research Protection, responded to the WHO's attempt to take away the sovereignty of all of its 194 member states, allowing the WHO to declare public health emergencies of international concern whenever and wherever they wanted, forcing people to get experimental shots, etc. To all of this, she responded in a private correspondence circulated among researchers in July 2024, and I quote her too. This statement would exonerate the mass non-consensual COVID-19 vaccinations. It essentially puts us right back to the discretion of the Nazi experiments and the U.S. present experiments if you perceive current policy of population reduction, which is obvious to me, how convenient to eliminate even the pretense of respect for the individual, without whose fully informed consent the experiment cannot go forward. This gives the CIA an open door. Tuskegee was no big deal by comparison. As we now know from the Epstein files, Bill Gates had Jeffrey Epstein build the investment vehicle for the monsters who wanted to make a killing investing in the pandemic. The same Epstein, through whose evil ritual child abuse empire almost all of the so-called world leaders are kept under control, and who represented the Rothschilds on other great investments, for example, the Ukraine war. CIA-funded Ukraine war that really started in 2014. In 2014, he wrote to Ariane de Rothschild, "The collapse of Ukraine should provide many opportunities." Remember that in my last statement, I told you that Tulsi Gabbard, on her last day in office, declassified information exposing Fauci and how he went about getting the pandemic started in early 2020, funded behind the backs of the American taxpayers with American taxpayers' money. What does all of this tell us? Two things. First, just like Kirill Dmitriev is not just a Russian investment banker, Leland Lerman is not just an American citizen, as many of you already know. Second, he and I agree, and so do others, that we need Nuremberg 2.0. In all likelihood, it will be based on natural law as far as the substantive law that we need to apply is concerned. That's the same as in the first Nuremberg trials. And as far as procedural law is concerned, it will be modeled after the grand jury investigation. And this time, the whole world will be the jury and will be able to vote on whether the evidence presented by the experts is sufficient for worldwide criminal indictments and civil class action proceedings for the most massive damages ever. Third, as far as our 3 assault waves against the fake criminal lawfare against me is concerned, here's the status quo. First, the appeal against Schindler's verdict against me has been pending for over a year now before the German Supreme Court. In order to let the court understand the real story of what happened in my case, I wrote that 166-page criminal complaint explaining about the details of the political persecution and the abduction in Mexico by the German government and the state of Lower Saxony. This appeal could be ruled upon any day now. Second, but we also filed our civil complaint for damages with the Hanover Regional Court and added a motion for preliminary injunction so that the case will not be slow-walked by the defendant, that is the state of Lower Saxony, whose judges and prosecutors and others committed the crimes against me. A copy of that civil complaint, plus the accompanying motion for a preliminary ruling to, 1, immediately set me free, and 2, immediately stop the fake criminal case against me, as it was only used as a guise for their political persecution. A copy of all this has also been sent to the Supreme Court, as we believe that not everyone in the German judiciary is controlled by those who used Epstein, and not everyone's frontal lobe has been destroyed by the experimental lobotomy shots. There will be some who understand that the civil case cannot be stopped or destroyed, especially not now that both the Mexicans will answer any and all questions any government might have, and especially now that the German government will also be asked about the complete documentation for my abduction, unredacted and not blacked out. Thus far, the only thing we know about our motion for a preliminary ruling is that both the regional court in Hanover and the district court in Celle, where our appeal is pending, are in panic. They did not dare, with the facts of the case, the so-called merits of the case, the abduction for political persecution, which is not just illegal, but in violation of Article 16 of the German Constitution. They did not dare even mention it. They hadn't even read it, not entirely. The judge in Hanover decided that we had not pleaded urgency, as I had been sitting around and not doing anything to have been behind bars for now more than 2 years and 8 months. I'm not really kidding. On our appeal, a single judge of the 3-judge panel of the District Court of Appeals in Celle was so shocked by what he read, I'm not kidding you, that he wrote, "Due to the legal complexity of this case, I remanded to the full court to be decided by all 3 judges of the panel." Meaning, this is not just going to blow up the corrupt Göttingen criminal justice system, but the entire German deep state system, as not just the government of the state of Lower Saxony is behind this, but the federal government with its domestic intelligence service and the German version of the FBI and the Secretary of the Interior ordered this crime to be committed against me and my wife. As a result of this panic, once again, just like the Hanover judge, the district court in Celle refused to even deal with the facts and decided that we had missed a deadline for filing the appellate brief. That, however, is a blatant lie. It's ridiculous, but it's obviously the only way they find for themselves out of this, and it merely shows how deathly afraid they are to apply the law to the facts presented to the court. Facts that are totally undisputed, because the court seems to have never even forwarded the complaint or the motion for a preliminary ruling to the defendant, so that the defendant never denied anything we stated in the complaint and the motion, as they never even filed an answer to it. Now, for good measure, we have just decided to file either today or tomorrow, a new motion for a preliminary injunction. They cannot evade ruling on the merits of the case. This time, they cannot do it. Simultaneously, we have filed a motion for a detention review hearing, which is pending before the District Court of Brunswick, the same court that just ruled that my communications rights must be reinstated because the ban by Schindler was illegal. Let us see who wants to go down with Schindler and his cronies, and who is still or again willing to uphold the rule of law. In the meantime, I'll start singing Crazy by Gnarls Barkley to show the monsters puppets whose bidding they are doing, and with whom they will go down with if they continue on the monster's path. And I'll quote what a friend wrote to me. This is really funny. The protagonists, that is, the monsters and their puppets, won't be able to pay the ferryman. That's what she wrote. This is a take on Greek mythology and Krista Berg's song, Don't Pay the Ferryman. Don't pay the ferryman until he gets you to the other side. Well, they can't pay. See you very soon, my friends, very soon.